For our second hormone lecture, we're going to cover where it all really begins. The hypothalamus is the gland that receives all the signals from the body telling what's going on. It then sends the appropriate hormones down a little stalk into the pituitary and causes the pituitary to send out its powerful hormones to places like the thyroid gland and the adrenal gland and so forth. So here's where we're going to start. When you're studying for the endocrine test, the endocrine test turns out to be pretty hard for some people, and I've never understood exactly why, because everything is real sequential. The heart is kind of all over the place. You have all kinds of different things going on with the heart. But the endocrine system, you have a stimulation to release a hormone. The hormone goes a certain way to the certain cell. It causes a certain effect. And if you have too much of the hormone, you get too much of that effect. And if you don't have enough, you get too little. So that's kind of the way you can look at each of these hormones and just learn what they do, and therefore what excess or deficiencies in that hormone would be. So we have a dozen or so hormones that you're going to have to learn. Thyroid hormone, testosterone, various, hormones that most of them you've heard of before. Where are they made? So, the thyroid hormones made in the thyroid gland. What stimulates their release? Well, low thyroid hormone would stimulate the release. And thyroid releasing hormone, or thyroid stimulating hormone, it causes their release. What type of hormone? Are they a peptide, water soluble, or are they fat-based, lipid-based? How are they transported? Because water-soluble hormones can transport just dissolved in the plasma, whereas the fat-soluble ones can't dissolve, so they have to be transported by a transporter, a transport protein. And so you can have a deficiency in the transport protein, too, and give you a problem. What are their major actions on the cells? So if you have hyper or hypo amounts, if you have hyperthyroidism, if thyroid does metabolism, your metabolism is going to be too high. Hypo is going to be too low. And everything that goes along with that. And then what is the negative feedback loop? When you get plenty of T4, thyroxine, in your blood, it inhibits the making of further T4. TSH, TRH, TSH, all of these things that cause the more thyroid hormone to make are inhibited. That's your negative feedback loop. And it's the same. You can look at each one of these hormones the same way. Just kind of go through this sequence of things. So we're looking at the hypothalamus first. You remember where it is from looking at the brain, the nervous system last time. It's at the upper part of your lower brain, right above the pituitary, right near some of the third and fourth ventricles. It receives information about things like your blood pressure, your pH, how much acid is in your blood, osmolarity of your blood, how thick it is, and the circulating levels of the various hormones that it's going to have to control. It sends outputs then, to control your temperature by making you sweat or shiver. But the main thing for this section is we're talking about how it will stimulate the pituitary to send out the hormones directly into the general bloodstream to go bind with the thyroid gland or the pancreas or someplace, wherever it's going. When the final effect is achieved, that last output is the axis. They call it the hypopituitary thyroid axis. Okay? So the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary. It sends out TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, to the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland sends out thyroid hormone. And then once you have enough thyroid hormone, it turns off the hypothalamus and pituitary. So you stop stimulating the thyroid gland anymore. That's your negative feedback. So let's look at the hypothalamus. Here it is, at the top of the brain stem, the bottom of this midbrain type area up here. The hypothalamus is right below the thalamus. The thalamus is up here. Hypothalamus is here. Pituitary stalk, and the anterior and posterior pituitary. They're two different kinds of tissue altogether. They work differently. The anterior pituitary is going to get most of our attention because that's where so many thyroid stimulating hormone and things come from. So the hypothalamus gets the signals from the body. It measures the amount of thyroid hormone, for instance, in your blood. It sends down what's called a releasing hormone down in here to cause you to release a hormone that's going to go out and make more thyroid hormone. The pituitary, and we'll talk about those hormones specifically later, the pituitary, also called the hypophysis. So the hypophyseal portal system just means the little system that takes the hormones from the hypothalamus down into the pituitary. That's the stalk. Hypophysis. The anterior is a gland that sends out a bunch of hormones into the general bloodstream. Sorry, I have a little bit of a frog in my throat. The posterior pituitary is where the hypothalamus can send a couple of neurohormones directly there and release them into the blood. So they're actually made in the hypothalamus, but released from the posterior pituitary. So it's a different system. We'll spend less time with it, although those are two really important hormones that will come out of there. We'll see more about them later. The anterior pituitary or anterior hypophysis is what we're going to be looking at mostly here. So here we have the hypothalamus. It has its own blood supply that comes right down into the anterior pituitary. This is the hypophyseal portal system. Okay, it goes from here down into the hypophysis, the anterior pituitary here. So the hypothalamus, when it gets the right signals, will send down hormones into here. Those hormones will turn on these little cuboidal endocrine cells to send out all the hormones that come from the pituitary. And these neurons here, these are actually neurons from the hypothalamus that are coming down and sending out your two posterior neurohormones into the bloodstream from your posterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary has this hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system. That just means the portal means that you got two little ports. It goes from here to here instead of going generally. So if you have a portal system, it's going from one port to another within two structures of your body. It's still in the bloodstream, so it's a hormone. But the hypophyseal portal system is what takes those hypothalamic hormones and delivers them to the anterior pituitary to cause it to send out its own hormones. Okay, and here we have the posterior pituitary. This is actually a giant neuron that sends a signal down and actually relieves its neurotransmitter is the hormone. It releases the hormone into the bloodstream. So that's the separate part. Posterior, anterior. Those two posterior hormones are antidiuretic hormone, which we'll see a whole bunch when we get to the kidney and control of fluids, and oxytocin, which is used for uterine contractions and things like that during childbirth. It's a big hormone for childbirth. So we're going to spend more time with oxytocin later in the semester when we talk about reproduction. ADH we'll talk about more in the kidneys. We'll talk about them a little bit now. but mainly we're going to talk about our anterior hormones. So the hypothalamus then is the main control center. Hypothalamus controls the posterior pituitary by sending the hormones out the back, and it controls the anterior pituitary by sending its hormones into the anterior pituitary to turn it on. The hypothalamic hormones are called tropins. A tropic hormone is a stimulating hormone. It turns things on. You know, if you have a tropic effect on something, it causes it to grow or increase its activity. So the ones coming from the hypothalamus into the anterior pituitary stimulate the anterior pituitary. So they're tropic hormones. Most of the ones coming out of the pituitary are tropic also. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland. So it's called thyrotropin. It's a tropic hormone for the thyroid gland. Thyrotropin, thyroid stimulating hormone. So, here are the hormones that come from the hypothalamus. Okay, these are the ones that will go down into the anterior pituitary. I'm not talking about those two going out the back. Those are separate deal. These are the ones that are going to go from the hypothalamus to tell the anterior pituitary to release more something or other. Okay? And these are all called the releasing hormones, because the hypothalamic hormones will cause the pituitary to release hormones. So if you see a releasing hormone, it's from the hypothalamus. The R's, the releasing hormones, are from the hypothalamus. Growth hormone releasing hormone. Guess what you would call, guess what that's going to cause the pituitary to release? Growth hormone. So if you send growth hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus down that little stalk, it will cause the anterior pituitary to release growth hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone causes you to release adrenocorticotropic hormone from the anterior pituitary. All this is adrenal cortex stimulator. This is adrenocorticotropin or adrenocortex stimulating hormone. So to get you to release that, you send a releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Corticotropin releasing hormone, look, it has an R in it. Releasing hormone will cause you to release this stuff to stimulate the adrenal cortex. Thyrotropin releasing hormone. This is going to go from the anterior, from the hypothalamus down into the anterior pituitary and cause you to release thyrotropin, better known as thyroid stimulating hormone. A stimulating hormone is a tropic hormone. So thyrotropic releasing hormone causes you to release TSH from the pituitary. Look, these are releasing hormones. Now you can see here there actually is a growth hormone inhibitory hormone too. So with growth hormone being so important, we have a stimulator and an inhibitor. Okay? All I'm really worried about right now though, we're turning stuff on. So it's there. You should know it's there, but it's not in red, right? What we have is growth hormone releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, the gonadotropin releasing hormones. You have two gonadotropins, one that causes you to make sperm and the other one causes you to make testosterone, because you have two different things. Or one that causes you to make estrogen and one that causes you to make eggs, or stimulate the egg maturation process. We will also be talking about these more during reproduction because you're turning on the testes and the ovaries. But you got to release these tropic hormones from the pituitary, and to do that, you send gonadotropin releasing hormone down the stalk. It causes you to release your two gonadotropins, luteinizing hormone, and follicle-stimulating hormone. We'll talk about them briefly in this lecture. We'll see them more dramatically in reproduction. Prolactin-releasing hormone will cause you to release prolactin from the anterior pituitary. That causes you to make milk. So these guys we're going to spend more time with in reproduction, but they are coming from, stimulated by the hypothalamus. You've got a releasing hormone for each one of them. And then you release those hormones, which are adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, gonadotropins, there are two gonadotropins, and prolactin, which is milk releasing hormone, basically. So here they are. Growth hormone releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, prolactin releasing hormone. These hormones come from the hypothalamus and they cause you to release human growth hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, your two gonadotropins, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, and milk releasing hormone or producing hormone, prolactin. Okay? And then out of the posterior pituitary, directly from those neurons, you release your two neurohormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Now, it does sound like a lot right now, but if you say this about 10 times, write it down on a napkin during lunch. We have these releasing hormones. They cause you to release these guys. And then we got two guys coming out of the back. That'll get you a long way toward understanding these first rounds of hormones. Now here's basic action. We'll look at these more specifically individually, but here's like a precursor to a summary slide. Growth hormone. Why they have to call it human growth hormone? I mean, what other kind would it be? Yak hormone? It's in humans, but anyway, human growth hormone is growth hormone. It stimulates growth. Duh. Okay? It has a two-step approach to doing it, but this causes growth. Adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates the release of cortisol. Okay, it's your main stress hormone from the adrenal cortex. Now, there are other hormones that come from the adrenal cortex too, but cortisol is the most important one. Thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, this is released when you send thyroid releasing hormone down. It causes the pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone. It goes to the thyroid and stimulates it. Right? That makes sense. It causes you to release your thyroid hormones. We have a whole lecture just on thyroid hormone and cortisol. Your follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, your two gonadotropins, will stimulate follicles or eggs and sperm. So FSH will stimulate the production of your follicles. That's eggs and sperm, depending if you're male or female. Luteinizing hormone will stimulate production of hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and so forth. There's some crossover, but that's a good way to start off remembering that. Prolactin stimulates breast growth and the development of your milk production system. So this obviously has to do with childbirth. Let's look more closely at growth hormone. It's a big deal. You can't do well without it. If you don't have growth hormone, you're going to be really small. It has a lot of effects on metabolism and growth. Okay, it helps you put together proteins and build bone and build muscle. People take it as an ergogenic aid to try to make them bigger and stronger. Growth hormone, all of these hormones coming out of the anterior pituitary are water-based. They dissolve in the blood, they go someplace, and they're gone within minutes, really. A lot of these hormones are fairly short-acting, so you have to keep making more of them. Growth hormone is so important and it has to reach all of your cells. So what it does, it goes out to the cells, but it also goes to your liver and causes the liver to make insulin-like growth factors, or somatomedins. Somato means body, so body mediator. These guys, they called them insulin-like growth factors because when they first discovered them, they were using insulin-looking receptors. The catalytic receptor. It's a different kind of receptor. And they said, well, that looks like insulin, and it's causing growth. So we're going to call it insulin-like growth factor. IGF-1, the main one, insulin-like growth factor 1, is one of your somatomedins. And it lasts a day. So the effects that you want growth hormone to have, growth hormone goes and directly binds to those catalytic, particular kind of receptors that growth things use. Insulin is a anabolic. It causes you to put glucose inside the cell. Growth hormone, insulin-like growth factor. The growth factors use those specific catalytic receptors. We talked about those in AMP1 last semester, but if you didn't have my course, you could look it up and see it a little bit more. But it's simply a different kind of receptor than a G protein receptor, or just a receptor that opens and lets ions flow through. It has an enzyme built into it, and it's just a different kind of receptor. And our growth stuff uses that kind of receptor. So, insulin-like growth factor 1, so it'll bind to those same type of receptors and cause growth effects that last much longer than growth hormone by itself could. So it's using a lot of this IGF-1 effect to enhance its own effect on growth. If you don't have enough growth hormone, you are a dwarf. You don't grow tall. You stay small. You can stay small and proportional, or if you have a different kind of a dwarfism, it's where your body and head grow normal size, but your arms and legs are short. That's a genetic thing, but just being a dwarf means that you haven't grown to normal stature. And if you don't have enough growth hormone, you won't grow to normal stature. However, if you don't have enough IGF-1, you won't either, because growth hormone doesn't do a good job by itself. So the African pygmies, who don't grow over about 3.5 feet tall, have plenty of growth hormone, but they don't make IGF-1. It's a genetic abnormality they have. They don't make IGF-1, and so they stay really small. Growth hormone increases protein deposits, protein synthesis. It'll break down proteins to build other things, increases amino acid transport into the cells to make proteins, transcription of proteins. It causes you to grow stuff. Increases utilization of fats. So people who take growth hormone to become a bodybuilder, their muscles tend to get big and their fat tends to get less. Well, that's what they're looking for. It's not good for you to do it. I certainly would not recommend it because it has side effects. It releases too much of your fat into the bloodstream, so it can cause coronary artery disease and fatty livers, a buildup of fat in the livers. It decreases glucose uptake, so you can keep your blood sugar high, so you can use it for a lot of energy or something. But it has, for that reason, it creates a diabetogenic or diabetes. If you take it, you'll wind up with high blood sugar all the time. I suppose you could take growth hormone and insulin to try to lower your blood sugar a little bit. Has a huge effect on the skeleton. It increases deposition of proteins into the growing bone cells, especially at the epiphyseal plates. So somebody who lacks growth hormone as a kid won't grow their long bones, because those are the bones that have the epiphyseal plates that grow at that point on the end of the bone. If it doesn't grow there, it eventually just seals and you wind up with a really short long bone in your leg or arm. Here we have with growth hormone, with less. Expansion of cartilage, which then ossifies into bone. Bigger, heavier bones, longer bones, primarily at the epiphyseal plate. Secretion is pulsatile. It goes up at times that you can grow. It goes up after major meals. It goes up during sleep at a time that you can grow bone and stuff when you're not using it in the middle of the day. You go to bed at night and you get a big spike so you can grow those bones. After you've finished your growth spurt, the pulsatility is similar, but the numbers are much lower. You don't have as much growth hormone when you stop growing. A lot of things here. More growth hormone. What will stimulate you to release growth hormone? If your blood glucose is too low, because growth hormone, adds blood glucose. So these various things, trauma, excitement, testosterone will cause you to release more growth hormone. The opposite here, if your blood sugar is too high, it will cut down on growth hormone and so forth. Aging, less growth hormone. Obesity, less growth hormone. And one problem is, if you have a lot of growth hormone, you won't make more. It's a negative feedback. So if you take a growth hormone supplement, one problem is that it stops your own body from making it very much. So you're losing your own natural growth hormone by suppressing it with the added growth hormone that you're taking. And here's the negative feedback. Okay, well, this is actually a pretty good slide. So, here's things that will increase or decrease your likelihood of making more growth hormone. Where's it going to go? The hypothalamus. If the hypothalamus wants you to make growth hormone, what will it do? It'll send growth hormone releasing hormone down into the anterior pituitary, which will cause growth hormone to be released. And then it goes to the liver to make your somatomedins, your IGF-1, which then goes out and does a bunch of stuff. Or the growth hormone itself can go out and have similar effects, but these are more powerful because it lasts longer. Your negative feedback loop is your amount of growth hormone or IGF-1. Okay, those are your products that you're making, are growth hormone and IGF-1, and they will come back and turn off both the hypothalamus and pituitary to cause it to shut down. So when you have plenty of growth hormone, it turns itself off. This is called the long loop. The long loop goes all the way back to the hypothalamus. The short loop goes to the anterior pituitary. Short loop. They don't have it modeled exactly right on here. Here they're saying this is short because it goes from here to here, and this one from here is long because it goes all the way from there to there. Just notice that generally the long loop refers to going all the way back to the hypothalamus to turn it off, whereas the short loop turns it off at the pituitary. Insufficient, dwarfism. Not enough growth hormone or IGF-1.